imagine, if you will, just taking a look at the device you're probably using to listen to this right now.
Right, your smartphone.
Yeah, your smartphone. It is your connection to your friends, your news source, and for a lot of you, it's actually the primary tool for your livelihood.
Exactly.
Now, I want you to picture an abrupt, just total blackout. You wake up one morning and every platform you rely on is just gone.
Just a blank screen, right? Mandated by the state.
Exactly, mandated by the state. So picture what happens next. You've got this group of teenagers and college students completely locked out of their digital lives.
And they retreat, into the obscure corners of the internet that the government doesn't even understand yet.
Right. They're sitting in their bedrooms, staring at their screens, and they start organizing a peaceful protest on a video game chat app.
Sharing memes, talking about wearing their school uniform.
Yeah, to show they're just kids. They're full of this genuinely optimistic, youthful energy.
It's a very standard Gen Z mobilization at that point.
But then I want you to fast forward just 48 hours from that exact moment. 76 people are dead.
Unbelievable.
85 billion rupees worth of property is completely destroyed, reduced to ash and rubble. The police have effectively abandoned the streets.
And the entire nation is plunged into this paralyzing state of emergency.
So the question is, how does a digital hashtag, a simple trend on a gaming server, warp so violently into unprecedented nationwide chaos?
It's really the ultimate modern paradox. It's what every democracy is absolutely terrified of right now. I mean,
that's the speed of it all.
Yeah, exactly. You are watching this entirely frictionless, hyper-accelerated world of the internet crash head-on into the very heavy, very permanent physical reality of state power and street violence.
Right.
And when that digital realm bleeds into the physical one without any guardrails, well, the consequences are catastrophic.
Which brings us to today's deep dive. Welcome, everyone. Our mission today is massive. We are unpacking a highly detailed, incredibly sobering official document.
The Karki Commission Report.
Yes, the Karki Commission Report. It's an exhaustive investigation into the events of Bhadra 23 and 24 in the year 2025.
Which, for those of you using the Gregorian calendar, roughly translates to September 2025.
Right. And this was a 2-day period that quite literally shook the nation of Nepal to its absolute core.
It really did.
So what we are doing today is exploring the mechanics of this disaster exactly as they are laid out by the Commission. We're going to examine the viewpoints of everyone involved.
The youth protesters, the police commanders on the ground, the highest levels of government. We're looking at all of it.
And just to be clear, we are entirely impartial here. We are not taking sides. We are simply looking at the autopsy of a systemic collapse to understand how the anatomy of a modern riot actually functions.
And I'll say the autopsy that this commission performed is brutally honest. I mean, it sets the stage by identifying the primary actors.
Right, the key players.
Yeah. You have a movement led by Gen Z. These are digital natives, young people whose entire concept of organization, community, and action is mediated through screens. And what the investigation lays bare is basically a catastrophic multi-lane collision.
You've got this digitally mobilized youth movement, right, driven by entirely genuine, deep-seated economic grievances.
Yes. But then you have malicious, highly opportunistic infiltrators who see this organic momentum.
And completely hijack it.
Completely hijack it, using highly sophisticated psychological tactics.
And the third vehicle in this collision?
The third vehicle is a state security apparatus that was essentially operating in the previous century.
Yeah, they were completely out of their depth.
Utterly failing to understand or manage the situation as it unfolded in real time.
So to really grasp the explosion of Bhadra 23, we can't just look at the spark. We have to examine the powder keg.
The pressure cooker.
Right, the pressure cooker that was building up in Nepal for decades. Because, you don't get 76 deaths and billions in damages just because an app stops working.
No, absolutely not.
You get it because the system was deeply, fundamentally compromised long before the youth ever hit the streets.
Precisely. You need a population that is highly combustible. And the commission highlights deep systemic frustrations that created that exact condition.
Like the political instability.
Yeah. When you look at the historical backdrop mapped out in the investigation, you see a 35-year timeline that is defined by one word, which is instability.
Right.
Over the past 3.5 decades, Nepal saw 30 different governments.
Wait, 30 governments in 35 years?
Yes.
Think about that for a second. That is an average lifespan of just over a year per administration.
It is the very definition of political paralysis. I mean,
Yeah.
from a mechanical standpoint, when a government only lasts 14 months, what happens?
Nothing gets done.
Exactly. Long-term infrastructure projects stall out. Educational reforms are drafted, but never actually implemented.
And foreign investment probably dries up because capital demands stability.
Right. The investigation points out a persistent, inescapable cycle that the public was forced to endure.
Because these governments were largely formed through complex coalition horse trading, right?
Yeah, so the public was seeing the exact same political figures returning to power time and time again.
They would just shuffle the cabinet portfolios.
Exactly.
Oh.
There was rampant documented corruption, incredibly high unemployment, and as a direct result, a massive brain drain.
Young people were simply leaving the country in droves.
Migrating to the Middle East, to Australia, to North America, just to find basic economic opportunities.
The analogy that always comes to mind for me here is a deeply frustrating game of musical chairs, but played in a locked room.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, like the music plays, the music stops, but it is the exact same handful of people who just keep swapping seats.
Right.
And meanwhile, an entire generation of youth is standing outside that room, peering through the window, completely locked out of the game. They are locked out of their own country's future.
And that feeling of being locked out is exactly what defined these Gen Z protesters.
The commission goes out of its way to profile this specific demographic, don't they?
They do. They define them as highly connected. They are deeply aware of global trends. I mean, if you are 20 years old in Kathmandu in 2025, you are not living in a vacuum.
No, you have a supercomputer in your pocket.
Right. You are watching what is happening in the rest of the world, and you are incredibly impatient for tangible results at home.
They were looking across the globe at their peers.
They were. The investigation notes that this generation watched similar youth-led movements achieve monumental results.
Like in Sri Lanka.
Yes. They watched the Aragalaya movement in Sri Lanka physically occupy presidential palaces and actually force a leader to resign over economic mismanagement.
And Bangladesh, too.
Right. They watched student-led quota protests in Bangladesh achieve massive structural reforms. They saw youth mobilizations in Indonesia.
So they saw empirical proof that when the youth organized, the state had to listen.
Exactly. And they were highly vocal about this online. They popularized hashtags like NepoBaby, expressing this deep-seated anger over nepotism.
They felt that meritocracy was entirely absent from their society.
That's what the report says. If you didn't have the right political connections, your talent simply did not matter.
So you have this deeply frustrated, highly observant, and digitally connected generation. The powder keg is packed tight. But what was the spark? What actually lights the fuse?
According to the Karki Commission, the tipping point arrived abruptly on Badr 19.
Just 4 days before the massive, catastrophic protests.
Exactly. The government suddenly banned 26 different social media platforms.
26?
26. Virtually the entire digital public square was wiped out overnight.
And what was the official reason given for that?
The official reason cited by the state was the need to control quote-unquote unwanted activities and to bring these tech giants under domestic tax regulations.
Wow. This is where we see the catastrophic disconnect between the state's policymakers and the reality of its citizens.
It really is. The people writing that policy likely viewed social media as a luxury, a place for sharing vacation photos or idle gossip.
But for Gen Z, these platforms are infrastructure.
They are infrastructure.
I mean, imagine your entire professional network, your storefront, your marketing department, and your main source of income all being deleted simultaneously.
It's devastating.
For content creators, digital marketers, freelance coders, small online business owners, this ban wasn't merely a political inconvenience. It was a targeted economic blackout.
It was an economic blackout, a social blackout, and an informational blackout all at once.
Yeah.
It gave this incredibly frustrated generation a concrete, unifying, undeniable reason to mobilize.
The abstract frustration about a 35-year political cycle was suddenly concentrated into an immediate, deeply personal grievance.
It united them instantly. And in direct response to that digital blackout, they scheduled a nationwide physical protest for Badr 23.
But wait, this is where the logistics become fascinating to me.
How so?
Well, if all the major social media apps, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, if they were all banned and actively blocked by domestic internet service providers on Badr 19, how on earth did this generation organize one of the largest physical mobilizations in the country's history in just under 4 days.
Right. You can't exactly pass out physical flyers to 1 million people.
No. So how did they do it?
This is where the story shifts into the mechanics of the digital underground. With the mainstream, highly visible apps restricted, the youth executed a rapid tactical pivot.
Okay.
They moved to a platform that was entirely off the radar of the older political class. They moved to Discord.
Ah, Discord, the app designed for video gamers.
Yes.
For those of you who don't know, Discord isn't a traditional feed where you just scroll through posts. It's totally different. But how did it bypass the ban?
It bypassed the ban precisely because of what it is. It's an application primarily used by gamers to chat via voice and text while playing multiplayer games.
So the government just didn't know about it.
Exactly. The policymakers who drafted the ban list of 26 platforms were looking at the giants of social media. They likely had no idea what Discord even was, so it was never added to the blacklist by the ISPs.
That's a massive oversight.
It's huge. Furthermore, Discord operates differently. It allows users to create private, invite-only servers.
Right.
Within those servers, you can have dozens of separate, highly organized channels for specific topics. And crucially, it operates with a high degree of anonymity.
You aren't using your real name and linking to your family members like on Facebook?
No, you are operating under an alias.
And the Karki Commission report specifically names 2 massive servers that became the epicenters of this movement almost overnight, right?
Yes, they were called Youth Against Corruption and UAHub.
The sheer volume of data the investigation audited from these servers is just mind-blowing. Within a span of roughly 50 hours, over 664,000 messages were exchanged in these spaces.
Over 500,000 messages in 2 days. That is a blistering pace of communication.
It's insane.
These servers essentially became massive, decentralized virtual command centers. And the level of organization was incredibly sophisticated.
They weren't just venting their frustrations into a void.
No, they were executing complex logistical planning.
The details the commission provides here are striking. They were coordinating specific geographic meeting spots in Kathmandu.
And they were arguing over and eventually deciding on a dress code.
Right. They agreed to wear their school or college uniforms to the protest to visually emphasize to the media and the state that they were students.
They wanted the optics of youth.
They even held a digital poll inside the Discord server where they literally, quote-unquote, elected a former Chief Justice, Sushila Karki, as their ideal prime minister.
It's amazing they were running a complete parallel political process in the digital shadows.
It functioned as a spontaneous digital democracy in those initial hours. They were polling, voting, and strategizing.
They were.
But, here's where I have to pause and push back a bit on the slightly romanticized idea of this purely democratic, peaceful youth movement.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because a digital poll is incredibly susceptible to manipulation. If it's an anonymous gaming server, how do you know the quote-unquote will of the youth isn't just 10 highly motivated individuals running automated scripts and bots to inflate vote counts and drive the narrative?
That's a very fair point.
And more importantly, the investigation shows that this digital space did not stay peaceful. How do we get from let's wear our school uniforms and demand reform to the absolute visceral violence we see just days later?
Your skepticism is exactly what the Commission's cyber investigators focused on. The rapid, violent radicalization of these servers is really the core of the tragedy here.
Right.
And it comes down to the mechanics of disinformation and the vulnerability of anonymous platforms.
Here's what happened.
The report meticulously details how the original idealistic Gen Z organizers quickly lost control of the very digital spaces they created.
Because they shared the invite links too widely.
Exactly. Because Discord links were eventually shared widely to grow the movement, the doors were thrown open. Other elements, people with specific, violent political agendas, anarchists, and highly organized malicious actors flooded into the youth against corruption servers.
And these infiltrators brought some terrifying, highly sophisticated tools with them.
They really did.
The investigation provides examples that are genuinely chilling. The investigators found AI-generated images, deep fakes, circulating in these chats.
Hyper-realistic images.
Yeah, these were images showing the National Parliament building and Singha Durbar, which is the administrative heart of a government, completely engulfed in massive flames.
Right.
But here's the detail that stopped me in my tracks when I read the report. These images of burning government buildings were being circulated before any actual fires had started in the real world.
It is a well-documented psychological warfare tactic known as predictive programming.
Predictive programming.
Yes. By generating and flooding the chat with photorealistic images of the parliament burning, these malicious actors weren't reporting on an event. They were planting an idea.
Wow.
They were showing the agitated crowd exactly what they wanted them to do. By visualizing the violence, framing it as an inevitability or even as something that was currently happening elsewhere, they normalized the taboo of attacking a state institution.
It lowers the psychological barrier to committing arson.
Exactly.
That is incredibly dark.
Sure.
And the technology didn't stop at AI images. There was a specific web application mentioned that essentially weaponized mapping technology.
Yes. The commission highlights a custom-built web application hosted on a platform called Vercel, specifically named netacore.vercel.app.
How exactly did that function on the ground? Like, what did it do?
It was a crowdsourced digital map that specifically pinpointed the private residential addresses of top political leaders, high-ranking police officials, and judges.
That's terrifying.
It provided real-time geographic data to an angry mob. It was framed as a transparency tool, see where the corrupt politicians live, but functionally, it was a highly efficient targeting system.
It gave thousands of angry, anonymous users precise coordinates for where to direct their physical rage.
Exactly, but, the radicalization wasn't entirely dependent on high-tech AI or custom mapping apps. No, the investigators found that good old-fashioned vicious rumors were just as effective, if not more so.
Read the rumors.
The commission notes that wildly false, highly inflammatory stories were systematically planted in these Discord channels.
Like the one about the local student hostel.
Yes. One prominent rumor that spread like wildfire claimed that police officers were actively raping young girls in a local student hostel.
And the official report explicitly states that this was a deliberate, entirely fabricated tactic.
Entirely fabricated. And we have to analyze why a rumor like that is used.
Why do you think?
Disinformation isn't always about convincing someone of a complex political lie. Often, it is designed to bypass logic and critical thinking entirely by triggering a visceral, primal emotional response.
Right.
When a user reads that the state police are assaulting children in a hostel, the cognitive part of their brain shuts down and the amygdala takes over.
It incites pure, uncontrollable rage.
Exactly. You are no longer marching for economic reform. You are marching for vengeance.
When you look at the ingredients here, it is a recipe for absolute disaster.
A perfect storm.
You combine the inherent anonymity of a platform like Discord, the emotional raw nerve of a generation that feels economically suffocated by a social media ban, and highly targeted algorithmic disinformation designed to trigger rage. You get a highly volatile, weaponized crowd.
Yes, you do.
Let's look at the chilling timeline the commission tracks inside Discord. By the night of Padre 22, just hours before the sun rises on the scheduled protest, the tone of the conversation had shifted completely.
The chat logs from that night, preserved in the report, represent a complete ideological takeover.
Right.
Users were no longer discussing peaceful chants or holding up signs. They were actively exchanging detailed, step-by-step chemical recipes for manufacturing napalm in their kitchens.
Napalm in their kitchens.
Yes. They were sharing instructional diagrams on how to construct effective Molotov cocktails using household items.
I remember reading those specific sections. You have anonymous users with gamer handles like Idacare and Joseph literally typing out the optimal ratio of motor oil to gasoline to ensure the fire sticks to riot shields.
Precisely. The logistical planning evolved from organizing bus routes to coordinating tactical urban warfare.
It's just wild to think about,
The report documents users discussing the logistics of smuggling weapons across the open border from India. They were sharing maps of police barricade lines and coordinating tactical plans on how to flank and attack law enforcement positions.
So as a listener, you have to be asking yourself, how does a sovereign government completely miss this?
Right. Where was the intelligence?
Exactly. If there are hundreds of thousands of messages detailing weapons smuggling, deep fakes of parliament burning, and napalm manufacturing, where was the state intelligence apparatus?
This brings us to a massive systemic failure identified by the Karki Commission. The state was entirely functionally blind. The National Investigation Department, the NID, which is the country's primary intelligence gathering agency, completely missed the buildup on Discord.
How is that even mechanically possible in 2025?
The Commission's analysis is damning here. The NID lacked the technical capability, the modern cyber surveillance tools, and frankly, the basic technological literacy to monitor platforms outside the mainstream.
So they were just looking in the wrong places.
The state surveillance apparatus was built to monitor Facebook posts, tap traditional phone lines, and rely on physical human informants.
Right.
When the youth migrated to an encrypted, decentralized, alias-based gaming server, the intelligence agencies simply didn't know how to follow them.
They couldn't adapt.
They didn't have the digital infiltration tools, nor did they have the foresight to even look there.
It's like a security guard staring intently at the reinforced front door of a bank, completely unaware that 1,000 people are already inside the vault because they used the ventilation shafts.
That's exactly what it was like.
The intelligence agencies weren't just outgunned, they were looking in the wrong dimension entirely. The state apparatus was preparing for a traditional 20th century street protest, the kind of standard political rally they had managed dozens of times before.
But the crowd they were about to face was executing a 21st century, digitally coordinated, tactically fluid operation.
It was a complete mismatch of eras.
And that profound informational asymmetry is the catalyst for the tragedy. Armed with this incredibly volatile mix, the genuine, deep-seated frustration of the youth, the highly organized digital logistics, and the weaponized, rage-inducing disinformation planted by infiltrators, the sun finally rises on Padra 23.
This is the moment the digital powder keg violently spills into the physical streets of Kathmandu. The commission reconstructs the timeline of this day meticulously, minute by minute. Let's walk through the physical geography of how this unfolded based on the investigation.
Let's do it.
The morning of Padra 23 actually begins exactly as the original Gen Z organizers had planned. It is peaceful. The massive crowds begin to gather at Matikar Mandala.
For context, for those who don't know, Maitikar is a large traffic roundabout in Kathmandu that functions as the traditional symbolic site for public demonstrations in the city.
Right. So you have tens of thousands of youths, many adhering to the digital dress code, wearing their school and college uniforms.
Looking exactly like the students they are.
Yes, they're carrying signs, they are chanting slogans demanding an end to corruption and the reinstatement of their digital platforms.
In fact, the report explicitly notes that 3 separate factions within this massive protest had actually gone through the proper legal channels.
Oh, really?
Yes, they had received official written permission from the district administration office, promising a strictly peaceful assembly.
But the psychology of a massive crowd is incredibly fragile.
Oh, absolutely. Especially a crowd that has been subjected to 48 hours of intense digital incitement.
Sleep deprivation from late-night organizing.
And the visceral fear generated by those rumors of police brutality.
The commission traces the physical movement of this enormous crowd as they inevitably begin to march away from the Medikar roundabout. They move eastward along the main arterial road, heading directly toward the federal parliament building located in the Baneshwar district.
And the intersection of Baneshwar is where the entire narrative fractures.
Yeah.
Yes. The state police, anticipating a large crowd but completely unaware of the violent tactical planning discussed on Discord, had set up heavy physical barricades near the Everest Hotel, which is just down the street from the parliament.
Okay.
Their objective was standard: prevent the sheer mass of the crowd from breaching the highly sensitive, legally restricted zone around the legislature.
But as this enormous, highly energetic crowd pushes up against those metal and concrete barricades, the dynamic fundamentally shifts.
The report has some very specific, granular details about this exact moment.
What does it say?
It wasn't just uniform-clad students pushing against police shields. The commission notes a sudden, coordinated shift in the crowd's front line.
A shift.
Suddenly, individuals wearing black masks and specific identical jackets arrived at the very front of the confrontation, riding on motorcycles.
Ah. This was clearly not the Gen Z organizers.
No, absolutely not. This was a highly organized, militant element suddenly injecting itself into the vanguard of the protest, drastically escalating the physical aggression against the police line.
So the infiltrators moved to the front.
Yes. And the barricades are physically breached. They were dismantled and pushed aside.
And the police.
The police, suddenly facing an unprecedented mass of humanity tearing down the perimeter of a highly sensitive national security zone, begin to respond.
Right. Initially, the investigation shows they followed standard graduated crowd control protocols. They deployed water cannons. They fired volleys of tear gas to disperse the front line. They utilized rubber bullets.
But the crowd, now heavily influenced by the militant infiltrators at the front and fueled by the rage-inducing rumors they had consumed online, does not retreat.
They fight back.
They fight back. They begin hurling a continuous barrage of bricks, stones, and debris at the police lines. And critically, a faction of the protesters actually attempts to physically scale the walls and breach the parliament compound itself.
And this is the pivot point where the timeline turns into a mass casualty event. As a citizen reading this investigation, you have to ask the mechanical question. How does standard crowd control, even against a stone-throwing mob, escalate into the state, using lethal force against its own youth?
It's a question of protocol, or the lack thereof.
Exactly. Where was the operational protocol?
The commission details a catastrophic breakdown of command and control under extreme pressure.
Okay.
In response to the sheer volume of stones, the injuries sustained by officers on the line, and the terrifying prospect of the national parliament being overrun, the police on the ground escalated.
They escalated way too far.
They transitioned from non-lethal crowd dispersal to firing live ammunition directly into the crowd.
Directly into the crowd. The grim statistics from this single day, Bhadra 23, are devastating. 19 people died.
19.
17 individuals were killed in Kathmandu in the immediate vicinity of that parliament clash, and 2 others died in sympathetic protests that flared up outside the capital.
19 lives lost in a single afternoon. That is a trauma that permanently alters the psyche of a nation.
And the Karki Commission heavily and explicitly criticizes the security response here.
Oh, heavily. The legal and operational use of force was deemed vastly disproportionate.
Right.
The fundamental doctrine of law enforcement worldwide is that lethal force is meant to be an absolute, unavoidable last resort, used strictly to save a life in immediate lethal danger.
Yet, the forensic and ballistic evidence in the report indicates that live ammunition was used indiscriminately.
Indiscriminately.
Yeah.
They were firing assault rifles into a massive crowd that, while highly aggressive and throwing dangerous projectiles, was largely unarmed in a traditional military sense.
And there is a specific timeline detail regarding the administrative response that is just baffling to me.
The curfew.
Yes, the curfew. The chief district officer, the local authority in charge of security, officially declared a curfew at 12:30 p.m.
Right.
Now, the entire mechanical purpose of a curfew is to freeze a city. It gives the police the legal authority to clear the streets, force people indoors, and stop the violence immediately.
In theory, yes.
But the investigation reveals that the clash outside the parliament, an actual live-fire gun battle between the state and its citizens, lasted for 4 agonizing hours after that curfew was legally supposed to be in effect.
And this specific 4-hour window raises profound questions about the chain of command.
How does that even happen?
During that entire period, while live ammunition was being expended and the casualty count was steadily mounting, the commission found a shocking void of leadership.
Just a void.
There was no definitive order to cease fire transmitted from the higher-ups.
No.
None. The field commanders managing the barricades, the chief district officer and his command center, the officials at the Home Ministry, no one stepped in to definitively halt the use of lethal force.
The psychological reality for the security personnel on the ground must have been insane.
They felt entirely overwhelmed, outnumbered, and cornered. And without a clear, authoritative directive from leadership to pull back, regroup, and de-escalate, the tragedy simply compounded minute by minute, hour by hour.
So we reach the evening of Bhadra 23. The state has just utilized lethal force against its own youth. 19 people are dead. And despite the ban on 26 platforms, information finds a way.
You know it does.
Through VPNs, through the dark web, through encrypted messaging apps that evaded the blackout, the country is flooded with horrifying digital media.
Videos of the clashes.
Imagine seeing those videos. Shaky cell phone footage of young protesters, kids wearing the same school uniforms as your younger siblings, bleeding on the pavement, being killed by state police.
It's a tipping point. At this moment, the genuine idealistic anger of Gen Z is entirely consumed. It is replaced by a toxic cocktail of opportunistic violence from the infiltrators and pure, visceral, unadulterated grief and thirst for vengeance from the public.
Which perfectly and tragically sets the stage for the absolute nightmare of Bhadra 24.
The second day.
If Bhadra 23 was the spark in the initial explosion, Bhadra 24 was a catastrophic, uncontainable wildfire. The Karki Commission literally categorizes the events of this day as spontaneous combustion.
Spontaneous combustion. It's a fitting term. By the morning of Bhadra 24, the dynamics had fundamentally shifted.
In what way?
The original Gen Z organizers, the students who had meticulously planned the peaceful march on their Discord servers, had entirely lost control. The movement they birthed was no longer theirs.
It had taken on a life of its own.
The extreme trauma of the previous day, the highly publicized deaths of 19 individuals, acted as a catalyst that triggered a massive, spontaneous, and intensely violent uprising across the entire nation.
The narrative was no longer about a social media ban or demanding anti-corruption legislation. It was about raw retaliation against the state apparatus itself.
Exactly. And the commission is very careful to draw a crucial distinction regarding the actors on the second day.
Okay, what distinction?
While the youth were undoubtedly participating, driven by anger and grief, the extreme systematic violence of Badr 24 was heavily co-opted and driven by opportunistic criminal syndicates, highly organized looters, and rival political factions.
So it wasn't just angry kids anymore.
Far from it. These groups recognized that the state was weakened and bleeding, and they infiltrated the chaos to settle old political scores, destroy evidence in government buildings, or simply pillage for profit.
To really visualize the state's security posture on this second day, think of a massive, aging hydroelectric dam holding back a gargantuan reservoir of water.
Okay.
Suddenly, due to the pressure, 100 different critical leaks spring open all across the concrete face simultaneously. But when you look inside the control room, the engineers are gone. The communication lines are severed. And there is absolutely no one in charge of coordinating a response to patch the concrete. The entire state apparatus simply buckled and collapsed under the sheer volume of the crisis.
The investigation details a genuinely horrifying extent of destruction. And it is crucial to note that this wasn't just random, disorganized street brawling.
It was coordinated.
Mobs simultaneously and systematically targeted the most secure, vital, and symbolic installations in the country.
Like what?
They attacked the physical compound of the Supreme Court. They violently besieged Singha Durbar, the walled complex that houses all the major government ministries and the central nervous system of the bureaucracy.
Wow.
They marched on the official residence of the president, and they launched assaults on the prime minister's official residence in Baluwatar.
And the violence didn't discriminate. It wasn't just government buildings that bore the brunt. Private businesses, corporate headquarters, shopping centers, and the central offices of various political parties, they were all systematically attacked, completely looted of anything valuable, and then set on fire.
But perhaps the most alarming mechanical failure of the day was the targeting of the security forces themselves.
Right, the police stations.
Police stations across the city became prime targets for the mob. The crowds, vastly outnumbering the stationed officers, attacked the precincts. They physically overran the defenses, breached the armories, and actively stole police weaponry and ammunition.
Stolen, state-issued assault rifles and riot gear suddenly in the hands of an anonymous, furious mob. How does the police force even begin to respond to that?
The stark reality presented in the report is that they didn't.
They didn't.
The commission states that by 10 a.m. on the morning of Badr 24, the national police forces were so utterly overwhelmed, so vastly outnumbered, and so severely outmaneuvered that they effectively surrendered the streets.
They just gave up the streets.
They executed a tactical retreat, falling back entirely just to protect their own precincts and their own lives. They abandoned the public squares, the intersections, and the commercial districts.
Wow.
The Karki Commission officially categorizes this period as a total, quote-unquote, security vacuum.
Yeah.
There was no law enforcement presence left to intervene. The state had ceded control of the capital to the mob.
The human and economic toll of this vacuum is staggering. When the fires finally burned out and the dust settled, the final numbers documented by the commission were grim.
Let's hear them.
Over those 2 days, 76 people were dead. 42 of those fatalities were directly attributed to police gunfire. 3 police officers were brutally killed by the mob during the precinct overruns.
Right.
The remaining deaths were the result of violent clashes between rival factions, asphyxiation in structural fires, and chaotic trampling during looting. Additionally, 2,522 people sustained documented injuries, completely overwhelming the hospital systems.
And the physical damages?
The commission audited the damages at 85 billion rupees.
From an analytical standpoint, the most pressing question the commission had to answer was why? Why did the defense collapse so completely? How does a sovereign nation's entire multi-layered security apparatus fail completely in a matter of hours?
And what did they find?
The investigation points unequivocally to a total interagency failure. There was zero operational coordination between the different branches of the state.
Let's break down those branches. The report mentions 3 distinct pillars of security: the Nepal Police, the Armed Police Force, or the APF, and the Nepal Army.
Yes. In a functioning state, during a national crisis of this magnitude, these 3 agencies are supposed to fuse together.
Right. They should be working as one.
They should be sharing real-time intelligence instantly and deploying their personnel in a synchronized, coordinated manner to secure the most critical assets.
But that didn't happen.
Not at all. They operated in absolute impenetrable silos. The Karki Commission explicitly notes the complete absence of a unified command.
So the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing.
Exactly. The police didn't know what the APF was doing, and neither of them was talking to the military.
But the army was actually physically present in the city, right? I remember reading that military units were deployed near the vital installations.
They were physically present, standing guard. But here is the critical legal and administrative failure that paralyzed them. The military didn't have clear rules of engagement. They lacked explicit legal orders on how to actively assist the civil police forces. The military operates under strict constitutional frameworks.
So they couldn't just step in without authorization.
Right. The civilian administrators, the local government, and the central cabinet failed to declare the necessary legal frameworks, like instituting a formal state of emergency early enough that would have legally permitted the army to lead their defensive postures and actively manage the domestic riots on the streets.
So you had a surreal, horrifying scenario. Heavily armed soldiers standing guard behind the gates of a ministry building, essentially watching as chaos, arson, and murder reign just 50 yards down the street.
Completely unable to intervene effectively because they didn't have the legal cover to act.
Yeah.
Combine that with the fact that the intelligence agencies were entirely blind to the digital movements orchestrating the violence, and you have a perfect storm.
Yeah. It was a failure of communication, a failure of legal bureaucracy, and a catastrophic failure of leadership.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the final and, frankly, the most explosive and historically significant part of this entire deep dive. When you have a failure of this magnitude, when the entire system buckles, how does a government commission assign blame?
Usually they don't.
Right. Usually when we read these types of post-mortem reports, the blame gets conveniently pushed down the bureaucratic ladder.
The politicians pass the buck.
Yeah. The political leaders claim ignorance, and the fault is squarely placed on the shoulders of the sergeant on the ground or the local precinct captain who made a bad tactical call in the heat of the moment.
But the Karki Commission did not do that.
They did not.
They took a radically different, almost unprecedented approach to accountability. We can refer to their methodology as radical accountability.
Radical accountability.
They did not stop at the precinct level. They followed the chain of command all the way to its absolute zenith. They went straight to the top.
No excuses at the top.
The commission formally interviewed the highest civilian leadership in the country. They interrogated the prime minister and the home minister regarding their actions during those 48 hours.
And what was their defense? Because I can guess.
The defense presented by the top leadership was exactly what you would expect. It was essentially, we are politicians, not police commanders. We didn't explicitly order the police to shoot live ammunition into the protesters. We didn't personally pull the trigger.
So they tried to blame the field commanders.
Therefore, the direct blame lies with the local chief district officer and the field commanders who tactically mismanaged the crowd control. They attempted to legally pass the buck down the chain of command.
And how did the commission respond to that defense? Because on the surface, there's a certain legal logic to it. A prime minister isn't holding a radio directing a water cannon.
The commission rejected that defense entirely. And this is where the legal analysis in the report gets incredibly sharp and sets a massive precedent. To bypass that defense, the commission cited and applied the heavy legal doctrine of criminal negligence.
Criminal negligence. Let's really pause and explain the friction of applying that term to a head of state. What does that mean in the context of a street riot?
In severe legal terms, criminal negligence means that when you hold the highest office of authority, your deliberate inaction, your failure to execute your duties in a crisis, can be just as criminal as a direct physical action.
Right.
The commission argued vigorously that when a 4-hour sustained gun battle is happening literally right outside the physical building of the nation's parliament, the head of state and the minister of interior cannot simply shrug and say, well, we didn't know the specific tactical details, or it wasn't our direct operational call to make.
Right. It is fundamentally your job to know. It is your job to seize control of a spiraling national security crisis.
Exactly. The report details their specific failures. By failing to establish a unified interagency command structure beforehand, despite the rising tensions. By failing to actively intervene, pick up a phone, and explicitly order a ceasefire during a prolonged 4-hour massacre.
And the military aspect, too.
Right. And critically, by failing to legally declare a nationwide emergency early enough to deploy the army effectively on Bhadra 24 to stop the looting.
Because of these profound failures, the political leadership wasn't just deemed incompetent or politically unpopular.
No, they were deemed legally culpable for the loss of life. Their failure to exercise their authority to stop the dying was the crime.
That is a staggering legal precedent to set. And they didn't just speak in abstract institutional terms. They named names.
They handed down specific, severe legal recommendations. The Karki Commission formally recommended that criminal investigations and prosecutions be initiated against the former Prime Minister K.P. Sharma Oli. They recommended the exact same criminal prosecution for the former Home Minister, Ramesh Lakak, and the former police chief, Chandra Cooper Kapun.
We are talking about potential criminal indictments for the highest offices in the land. The charge is criminal negligence leading to mass loss of life. And they also went after the administrative layer beneath the politicians too, didn't they?
They did. The commission recommended administrative and legal action against the Home Secretary and the Chief District Officer for their respective roles and paralysis during the disaster.
So no one escaped accountability.
The underlying message of the entire report was absolute. If you hold the legal authority of the state, you hold the ultimate responsibility for the outcome, even if you try to look the other way when the shooting starts.
But the true value of the Karki Commission report isn't just that it serves as a list of indictments. They didn't just point fingers, demand jail time, and walk away.
No, they offered solutions.
Right. They understood that you can put a politician in jail, but if the underlying structural mechanics of the state are still broken, the exact same tragedy is just going to happen again the next time an app is banned. So they offered comprehensive, systemic fixes.
And these systemic recommendations are absolutely crucial for the future survival of the state apparatus in a digital world. First, they demanded the immediate creation of a multi-agency intelligence fusion center.
To fix the silo problem.
Yes, they mandated the destruction of the intelligence silos.
Yeah.
The National Police, the Armed Police Source, the Army, and the National Investigation Department must be legally required to share data in real time under a single, unified operational roof.
Second, the report highlighted the absolute urgent necessity of outfitting the civil police forces with modern, non-lethal riot gear.
Right. The tools on the ground.
The investigation made it glaringly clear that if the police on the ground at Baneshwar had possessed better, more reliable tear gas deployment systems, modernized water cannons, and heavier physical barriers, they wouldn't have felt so immediately overwhelmed. You have to give law enforcement effective, non-lethal tools that exist between swinging a wooden stick and firing a lethal assault rifle bullet. If you only give them a hammer, every crowd looks like a nail.
Third, they recommended establishing clear, unambiguous legal frameworks regarding the military.
Your rules of engagement.
The state must define exactly when and under what specific chain of command the Army can be deployed to assist civil police in domestic riots. The bureaucratic hesitation and legal gray areas that paralyze the military behind their gates on Bhadra 24 must be legislated out of existence.
And finally, they addressed the massive digital elephant in the room. The commission stated that the government must build a highly sophisticated state mechanism to actively monitor and counter digital disinformation in real time.
The cyber aspect.
The state can no longer rely on tapping phone lines. They need cyber experts who understand Discord, who are monitoring Telegram, who can anticipate whatever the next anonymous platform is.
They need to understand the mood of the digital public square.
And possess the capability to swiftly debunk AI-generated deepfakes before they convince a mob to burn down a building.
Which brings us to a profound and deeply unsettling summary of these events.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the tragedy of Bhadra 23 and 24, the investigation paints a picture of a devastating perfect storm.
It really does.
You had decades of deep political rot and musical chairs that stripped the youth of their hope. You had an entire generation that was suddenly suffocated by an abrupt, unthinking digital blackout that severed their livelihoods and social connections.
You had malicious, opportunistic actors who brilliantly weaponized cutting-edge AI and obscure gaming applications to spread fire and bypass human logic.
And you had an antiquated state security apparatus that was stumbling around blindly, relying on outdated 20th century crowd control tactics and entirely broken communication lines.
It was a failure at every conceivable level of society, technology, and governance. And it leaves us with a deeply provocative thought, a paradox that every modern democracy, not just Nepal, is currently wrestling with in real time.
What's the paradox?
This deep dive shows us undeniably that in the hyper-accelerated digital age, a government can no longer survive by merely policing the physical streets. The physical riot is just the final symptom of a digital disease. They have to understand, map, and navigate the digital terrain.
Right.
But here's the paradox for you to consider long after you finish listening. If a state must actively infiltrate and monitor anonymous gaming chats, if they must deploy rapid counter-narratives and track user data to prevent the next riot or stop the next Molotov cocktail recipe from spreading. At what point does protecting the state from disinformation cross the line into the exact same authoritarian surveillance and censorship that caused Gen Z to protest in the first place?
Wow.
How do our modern democracies survive when the technological tools required to prevent a revolution and the tools of state oppression are exactly the same?
That is the incredibly thin, incredibly dangerous tightrope we are all walking on right now. The old playbook is burning, and the new landscape is incredibly murky. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Karki Commission report. Keep questioning the information you consume. Always look for the broader context behind the headline, and we'll see you next time.